Hi guys, at last, we are on the final part of the classic Sonic Marathon, if speaking main series of Sonic. So I've already covered up Sonic 1, 2 and CD so far, so if you have not seen those reviews yet for whatever reason, there's no doubt that you should watch them first. However, if you already did, then you may watch this review, and trust me, this review will be my ultimate review, at least when it comes to the classic Sonic games. As much as the development story goes for Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sega thought it was time to make a sequel to Sonic 2, so they started working on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This game was so huge that they had to split the team to two. One worked on the first half of Sonic 3, and the other worked on the other half. And later, the other half of Sonic 3 would become Sonic and Knuckles. And because they were running out of time, because of lacking equipment and money, they were forced to delay the other half of Sonic 3, and release the first half, so-called Sonic the Hedgehog 3, first. Then, there's a story that Sonic 3's original prototype was that it was an isometric-like game, which would later become the birth of Sonic 3D Blast. I'll cover that game some other time. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 had a save feature, unlike the other Sonic games, which was a welcome addition, especially to a game that is this big. The game had 6 zones along with mini-bosses in the first acts of each zone, and finally a real boss showdown thereafter with Act 2. The playable characters were Sonic or Tails. Of course, just like in Sonic 2, you could play with Tails running alongside you too. Sonic and Knuckles, on the other hand, which was the other half of Sonic 3, had no save feature and you could only play as either Sonic or Knuckles, and it was very off why this game did not have any save feature. Because with a game like this, which has no save feature, the levels are just far too huge. I honestly could not imagine anyone beat Sonic and Knuckles on one sitting. But it's no wonder that it is the way it is. You see, Sonic and Knuckles was an invention of the lock-on technology that Sega invented. You could put any game above it, and depending on which game you put above Sonic and Knuckles would affect the game showed off on screen. By combining Sonic and Knuckles with Sonic 2 above, you could play as Knuckles in Sonic 2. Then with Sonic 1 above Sonic and Knuckles, you could play Sonic 3's special stages. Finally, when you combined Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, which was what Sega wanted you to do for the first place, you would get Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And this is the true and full package of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This is without a doubt the way Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is meant to be played. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles zones are now all here in this massive journey of an adventure. You can now, thanks to this lock-on technology, play as Knuckles even in the first half of Sonic 3. And those rocks that you were not able to access to by either playing as Sonic or Tails, you are now able to break through when you're playing as Knuckles, extending the replayability for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 as a whole. In Sonic 3 and Knuckles, there is 3 playable characters: Sonic, Tails and Knuckles. And of course, you can also choose to play as Sonic with Tails running after you. I prefer to play that way the most, but I don't mind playing as just Sonic alone either. I did play as just Sonic alone in my first full playthrough of the game. This was my second playthrough of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, and I'd say it felt more satisfying than my first playthrough of Sonic 3 and Knuckles. mainly because I was more skilled this time around and it actually felt like I could maintain speed in at least a decent level, combined with the fact that I managed to pull off getting all the Chaos Emeralds. When you play as Sonic, you're playing normal mode. When you play as Tails, you're playing easy mode, because of the fact that Tails can fly, and because of that, you can fly past most hazards and obstacles on the levels, and also the fact that you can swim underwater, making already easy Hydrocity even easier. I'm very happy to say that Tails finally plays different from Sonic. If you remember in my Sonic 2 review, I despised the fact that Tails played just like Sonic, and the fact that he could not become super unlike Sonic. Sonic 3 and Knuckles also takes advantage of this kind of improvement by letting you being able to get super forms of Tails and Knuckles. Knuckles is obviously the hard mode in this game. While he can glide and climb on walls, he does have the harder paths and bosses. Even despite that, I'd still say it's quite satisfying to play as Knuckles. I'm also just glad how Tails' and Knuckles' greater forms plays different from Sonic's greater forms like Super and Hyper, because they have their own unique game mechanics. But I always try to stick with Sonic and Tails running alongside him. It just feels most satisfying to me, which is not a criticism towards Knuckles as an optional player, but rather me just explaining my personal preference when playing the game. The story takes place directly after Sonic 2. After Tails had saved Sonic from that fall with the tornado, Tails and Sonic are heading their way to Angel Island. Because the death egg of Sonic 2 was not completely destroyed, and so Knuckles shows up to knock out Sonic from his Chaos Emeralds and steals them from him to hide them in certain locations in the island itself. Robotnik convinced Knuckles earlier to make him believe that Sonic and Tails are his true enemies, and are after the Master Emerald. So that is why Knuckles is putting all this energy towards Sonic and Tails to try and stop their progress. When you play as Knuckles, the story is kinda different. There's this robot of Robotnik, kinda like a Badnik-like version of Robotnik, of which is causing trouble for Knuckles. So he gets annoyed by it and decides to try and to defeat that robot at last. While the biggest thing I look forward to in games is not story, I like it how they made the story in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's easily the best story of the entire trilogy in my book, and yes, I even include it as having a better story than Sonic CD. Everything, like I said earlier, connects, and those mini cutscenes truly adds a lot to the game's feel. It feels like you're on an actual adventure, unlike the first 3 games. Sonic CD, from a logical perspective, and as I see it, takes place after Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I mean, think about it. Why would Robotnik build a worse version of Metal Sonic, so-called Silver Sonic and Mecha Sonic, after the invention of Metal Sonic? Is it not logical to rebuild Metal Sonic again, as he was obviously the superior prototype? Of course, it's logical because it's common sense. Sega even confirmed themselves that Sonic 4 takes place after Sonic CD, and whether you like Sonic 4 or not, I don't care. If it's canon, then so be it. You can't change that just because you're being butthurt over it. There are 3 new power-ups of which Sonic 3 and Knuckles has to offer, and all of these truly adds to the gameplay and gives new unique game mechanics to the table. The first one is the Bubble Shield. It allows you to breathe underwater and bounce if you're playing as Sonic. There is the Fire Shield, of which protects you from fire, fireballs, and lava. And if you play as Sonic, it allows you to do a move that looks a lot like the homing attack, though it gets taken down by water. So keep that in mind when using it. The Lightning Shield allows you to get rings being dragged to you, at least the ones that are close to you. If you play as Sonic, this shield also allows you to double jump. So in a way, it kinda works like a magnet. All these new shields are a new addition, and they replace the regular shield very nicely. They can all come in handy in certain situations, and if you know how to use them correctly, they can come very much in handy. Just like with something like Sonic 1 with Sonic's momentum. Once you know how to maintain Sonic's moves and abilities correctly to the terrain, then you may be able to blast through the stages very well. Now, to jump into that gameplay. Just to refresh real quick, Sonic is for normal mode. It's your usual classic Sonic gameplay. Tails represents easy mode because he can fly and swim underwater. Knuckles is obviously the hard mode, with his more difficult paths and bosses. Obviously, Sonic, unlike Tails and Knuckles, can do more fancy things with the shields, like bounce, do a homing attack of some sort, and double jump. Sonic also has a new ability added to his gameplay. When you jump as Sonic, and in mid-air, press the jump button again, you will do the insta-shield. While it may look pathetic and useless, it comes very much in handy if you use it correctly. It gives you a split second of protection from hazards like spikes for a split second. And this is very much useful when it comes to bosses once you have mastered the way of using it. And once you have mastered its mechanics, I'd say it's very satisfying. This seemed to have been the only Sonic game from the main series that used this awesome move, and I don't count Sonic Advance because that is a spin-off from my concern. I'm self-aware of that. There are tons of people who will debate over that, but I honestly do not care. I only said it was from my concern, nothing more. The levels in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which you may know by this point, are super huge. There are all sorts of different routes and paths to take. It truly adds to the replayability. The platforming in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I'd say, is very nicely done. It keeps you engaged enough to pay attention to the game, and it actually feels like you get to do things rather than the game stealing the controls from you. Most of the time anyways. Unlike Sonic 2, which while it did for its credits have a better focus of speed and platforming compared to Sonic 1, which was very much just a regular platformer, Sonic 3 and Knuckles still perfects this even more. The speed, platforming, and exploration in this game complements one another very well, and rarely does it feel like to me like one gameplay is lacking. This is to me how classic Sonic should truly play. Anything less, and I'm not going to care for the game that much. So Sega, if you do plan on making your next Sonic game a classic Sonic game, then do please make it like you did in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I'm not telling you to make a remake or remaster, just that you make a new game with the same balance of speed and platforming like this game did. The power-ups are hidden very well on all these levels, and the exploration is very engaging to me, and I just love the feel it brings to the table. Like I said earlier, this indeed makes you feel like you're on an actual adventure, and not just on a track. All these levels, at least to me, feels like actual places that takes place from the real world. It does not feel like it was made by a game designer, of which made a level to a game for the sake of it. The ways the platforms and tiles are placed here feels rather natural and fluid to me, making the world all the more lively to me and relatable. In each zone, there's about 4 giant rings being hidden. They are for the most part reasonably reliable to find. What I'm trying to say is that I don't feel the way they're hidden is cheap. Or at least not cheap per se, as a whole. It's a major improvement from Sonic 1's and 2's method of getting to a special stage. No more needing to worry if you'll lose the rings or if you're going off a checkpoint far too much. Find a hidden location with a giant ring and jump inside the giant ring, and boom, you're in a special stage. The special stages in this game are miles better than the ones in Sonic 1, 2 and CD all combined. I'll say that right away. You're being in this 3D graphic-like area where you collect not blue balls, but the names being spears. A common mistake for people is to call them blue balls instead of spears. And yes, even YouTubers that are bigger than me does this mistake too. So next time you decide to tell me,
do your research, man.
Remember that there are way bigger YouTubers than me who gets a pass from these things very much easily. Double standard at its finest. Anyways, back on track. You collect the blue spears, touch a red one, and you're out of the special stage. There are these silver-like spears with the name bumpers that pushes you back once you've touched them. The mechanics are easy to understand, and all that it takes to beat these special stages is some good reflexes. Well, great reflexes in certain situations, coming from someone who usually has good reflexes. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes these special stages feels hard, but they can be very easy once you've mastered them. And it's not like you're mastering bad designs per se, it's just the easy principle that you're maintaining your reflexes better. Long story short, these special stages are really fun to play for me, and it's not hard for me to see why so many others feels this way as well. I used to despise them because they kinda make you dizzy, especially once all of a sudden you speed up. I get that they wanted to make the special stage increase on its difficulty if you have been a bit overboard with the time you've spent on them, but I still feel that these random speed ups are out of place and should not be there. Besides, some special stages are already challenging enough as it is, so what is the point? Though this is acceptable because you're being given a lot of chances to find at least one of those giant rings in any levels. It's not like you have to face the bullshit of Sonic 1, 2 or CD, where you only had a certain amount of times before you should just simply stop trying or simply restart the entire game. Another problem I have with these special stages is when they make complicated courses like these where you need to use a bumper in a very specific and pretty complicated way. Not only does this kind of lead to trial and error, because the turning, at least from my experience, does not always work as it should, but I also find that's a dick move from the game designers who decided to put that in. Besides that, these special stages are great in my book, and while they are not perfect, they come very close to me on being that. First, there are the Chaos Emeralds, which turns you to Supersonic. Then you have the option to also collect the Super Emeralds, of which turns you to Hypersonic. In my playthrough, I tried to avoid turning to Hypersonic, but as I was playing as Supersonic in Mushroom Hill Zone, I by accident ran into a giant ring, which led to me being forced to beat the other 7 special stages to get the Super Emeralds. And I did this while using the cheating method of using save state and later loading my states. You can call me a cheater all you want, but I honestly was not on a mood to get into the bad ending of the game again. Hypersonic, unlike Supersonic, is twice as fast, at least from my concern. Hypersonic can do this homing attack in midair, and he can breathe underwater. And Jesus Christ, just when I thought Supersonic was slippery enough, Hypersonic comes in just to be even more slippery. These forms allow you to blast through the stages rather fast to get more of that Sonic 2 feel, and I try to often avoid using them, but sometimes I turn into them against my will, though it's mostly because of my own screw-ups and nothing else. Because unlike Sonic 2 where you got to the form once you've jumped after the collecting of at least 50 rings, here you need to click the jump button again in midair after you have collected 50 rings in order to transform, leading to less frustration, or at least much less cheap and unfair frustration. Though I will say that unlocking Supersonic or Hypersonic offers a great final boss in the finale. More on that later though. There are 2 kinds of bosses in this game, the mini-bosses and the regular bosses. The mini-bosses are usually very easy, and you can beat them easily in a blast, at least if you don't play as Knuckles. These bosses are pretty fun to approach, and while it does feel satisfying to beat those bosses, they don't come close to beating the satisfaction of bouncing on the regular bosses to later see them explode on screen. It kinda brings that game addiction feel into it, which I talked about in my game addiction rant. The regular bosses put a good challenge, and if you have mastered them, they are still fun to approach. The final bosses, which you either do with supersonic or hypersonic, is really fun to approach. Sometimes it felt like it was a bit too much on screen, to a point where it kinda felt cheap. Though it's tolerable because there's a save feature in Sonic 3. Unlike Sonic 2, especially with its final boss, which I'd argue had more trial and error. And let's not forget the fact that Sonic 2 had no save feature at all. These bosses overall are miles better than the bosses in the other classics. Sonic 1 in some ways kinda comes close, because they also allow for thinking when you approach the bosses. But Sonic 3's bosses just gives a more epic feel and more dramatic scenes, because it overall feels like more is going on. It truly feels like Robotnik's machines has become more advanced and stronger, and it's because Robotnik has learned from his past battles with Sonic. I'd say that is great character development, and it makes him more life-threatening, as he's actually doing progress. And Robotnik is supposed to be threatening. He's the evil scientist who is trying to ruin the nature after all. I used to not be a big fan of Sonic 3's soundtrack list. There was a time when I preferred Sonic 2's soundtracks. And while I do like some Sonic 2 soundtracks better than Sonic 3's, like literally almost any Sonic 2 soundtrack over something like Marble Garden from Sonic 3, but overall, I have grown to enjoy Sonic 3's music by a ton, if we are speaking overall. It brings more of that journey, adventure, and mystical feel compared to Sonic 2. In other words, it adds more atmosphere to me, and seems rather fitting for the story's pace. Sonic 3's music is easily the best music so far for a Sonic game, at least from the games I have covered so far. Of course, even then, I got to admit that Sonic as a whole from the games I've covered has some really neat music, with Sonic 1's kind of being okay to me overall. And Sonic CD's is sounding good and all, but not being especially memorable to me. And yes, that applies for me to both the US and Japanese soundtracks of Sonic CD. The graphics looks great in this game, looks very suiting for the adventure feel the game was going way more, unlike Sonic 1, 2 and CD all combined. I have heard complaints saying the background is too much for their likings, and that the 3D effect that the background is trying to bring is making their eyes bleed. And I very much disagree with this. I either approach these people as having weak eyesight or not being able to appreciate a true piece of art. If we look at the backgrounds of Sonic 1, 2, CD in every and each level as a whole, as it does not seem that the background suits the tiles you're running on in the game. Unlike Sonic 3, where I could imagine something like Angel Island in 3D. Comparing that to Emerald Hill Zone and Green Hill Zone as an example, of which I could only imagine as being 2D-like tiles with edges very close to them. I also just love that water effect Hydrocity gives you. Once you have hit the bottom, the water gives you that 3D effect that you are underwater for real. Once you hit the top again, it gives you the opposite illusion, just like it should be. Adding with the fact that I just love the 3D purple background in Hydrocity Act 2. And I'm not just saying that because purple is my favorite color, but also because I feel that purple is really suiting for a stage going for a theme like this. I would also like to mention that I find Hydrocity probably to be my favorite zone in the game, if not the entire Sonic franchise, though that might be a too fast conclusion so I may calm my tits because I still have a lot of Sonic levels left to beat. Unlike the other water levels in the Sonic series like Labyrinth Zone and such, it's actually fun to approach, as it makes good use of platforming and speed to keep things going, even though you're underwater. Ice Cap comes very close to me, but in the levels as credits as a whole, they are all very well handled in my book, except for Marble Garden, which I find to be kinda generic and boring, then Sandopolis Act 2 with its annoying ghost and sand gimmicks. But besides that, the levels are fun and chaotic at the same time to approach, and I just love all the feels and gameplay mechanics they all bring to the table. It feels like they all bring something new, and that even the Act 2 of a zone brings new stuff to the table, both graphically and gameplay wise. Or should I say, pace wise? Something Sonic 3 seemed to get very right, its pacing. Something I'd like to note is that I came across this really odd glitch in Carnival Night, where I got stuck inside the tiles, and I was after that forced to wait until the timer ran out. But besides that, the game seemed to function just fine. Overall, Sonic 3 and Knuckles to me and many others is truly a masterpiece. If you're a fan of the platform genre, give this game a shot. I can assure you that you'll be having fun with it. This is truly the best platform game I've ever played. If not that, it's at least one of the best I've played, no doubt. And it will remain that way probably for the rest of my life, and that is saying a lot. A game being able to give this much of an impact. I would like to recover myself from some things I said in the past, like how I stated that Tails is currency yellow in his modern form. It seems that I was either colorblind by the time when I thought so, or I was just not paying attention. Tails is still orange, just more bright. Another mistake I seem to have made is that I stated Sega CD is a new console, when it's more off as a new system. And I'm very self-aware of that. I already knew it was an add-on to the Sega Genesis. I just like to think of it as a console because in a way, at least to me, when you combine it with the Sega Genesis, it becomes a quote-unquote new console of some sort. Also, I made the mistake of stating that the Sega CD did not sell well, and judging from the Sonic Wiki, I seem to not have been so wrong on that statement after all. Now remember, I was comparing it to Sonic 1's and 2's sales, not anything else. Why that was so hard to predict, I have no idea. So it was from that regard, Sonic CD sold pretty bad in my book. Otherwise, it sold fine, I'd say in the other regard. Then finally, I want to explain real quick on how I truly feel about Sonic CD. I by no means ever considered it a bad game. I just find it heavily flawed, especially with the way how they got the spin dash wrong, which is one of the things I overlooked in my review when mentioning flaws, which takes it down. Back on track, Sonic 3 and Knuckles does things better from the predecessors in every way possible, in my opinion. Well, almost every. It's a bit debatable because in a way all the classic Sonic games are still unique in their own right. For example, Sonic 2 still has the iconic chemical plant. On the other hand, Sonic 1 has the iconic Green Hill Zone, Spring Yard Zone, and Starlight Zone, to mention some examples. The multiplayer in Sonic 2 I think I could admit is better than the multiplayer in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But that is about it. Overall, Sonic 3 is just a better structured game to me. It was crafted very carefully, and you can tell that there was a lot of time and effort put behind this game. The game is by no means perfect, but in a way to me it kinda still is, because it comes very close. I still kind of had a bit of frustration, though not close to the frustration I had with Sonic 1, 2 and CD all combined. But just like I made it clear in my Sonic 1 review, there is no such thing as a perfect game at the end of the tunnel, and I don't like it when classic Sonic fanboys shits on the modern Sonic games because it does not come to their expectations. Sonic has always been flawed in one way or another, just like every other game series. It has never been perfect, and just like with things in life in general. Saying something like Sonic Lost World is a terrible game just because it's a
quote-unquote Mario copycat
is not going to help, and saying Sonic boosting in Generations, Unleashed, and Colors is a problem is not going to help either. At the end of the day, looking at these games as individuals will give the most fair judgment, and that is just what I do, and what I easily pick to go with. Because if you don't, you're not using the same standard towards Sonic as you are to other game franchises, which I find kinda offensive. All games may have the same expectation put behind them before playing them, so in this way you can judge the product's quality rather properly while not being distracted by small things that doesn't really matter and nitpick here and there. So, time to wrap it all up. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is not just a game to me. It's a journey and one massive of an adventure. Sonic 3 is full of thrill, wonder, mystery, and some truly epic sequences and moments. It's a game of glory, dark moments, and some truly memorable characters. It's mystical, engaging, and I love it so much.